Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Good afternoon, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I'm called Mulindwa Samuel, as mentioned. I don't know whether yes. Oh, sorry, just a minute. I want to put on the video. Hello?
Hello, Mister. We can see you. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm going to present the National School Feeding Program in Rwanda. Next, please. Next slide. Of course, we provided just a background. The background we started with the recent because a lot was done. Some few things were done, but a lot has been done, in the recent years. 2019, government of Rwanda had 3 school feeding programs. We used to subsidize secondary school feeding programs, and the primary and pre-primary by then was not part of that. However, for low levels, lower primary and pre-primary and ECD centers, we used to provide 1 cup of milk per child in some of the selected pre-primary schools, low primary, and all ECD centers. And of course, we've been having support from the World Food Program, where they've been supporting 104 schools and benefiting 85,000 students. So that has been ongoing. However, last year, government of Rwanda approved a policy, a school feeding policy, that incorporated all components of school feeding, and school feeding program was scaled up at national level for all levels of education, so which is pre-primary, primary, and secondary school. So with this legal instrument, school feeding is now mandatory in the whole of Rwanda for the education system within Rwanda. Next, please. And of course, backwards. Okay, so effective this fiscal year, which starts in July, school feeding was made mandatory for all government, public and government-aided schools, as earlier on mentioned. And in private schools which are not funded by government, instructions were issued by the Ministry of Education to ensure that all private schools also have school feeding as a mandatory action. So which means that the whole education system, people have to be fed. Of course, I would say that much as the budget was provided and preparation has been done, we were somehow, interrupted by the COVID-19, because in March schools were locked up. However, this very month schools have opened. So in terms of coordinating at the central level, the Minister of Education is responsible for the overall coordination, policy formulation, and strategic guidance for school feeding initiatives. However, the implementation is done at district levels, local authorities who are responsible for the implementation. So next, we clearly show, next on slide, we show the institutional arrangement that was established to coordinate the implementation of school feeding in Rwanda. At national level, we have the steering committee, the school feeding steering committee, which brings together different key players, development partners, ministries, and different government agencies to ensure that this exercise is done well and appropriately. And of course, it was streamlined within our school feeding technical working groups. So we have periodic meetings with all our stakeholders to know what is transpiring, what is being planned, what is being implemented, and what is being scaled up within the school feeding arrangement. And for the first time, initially, we did not have the school feeding unit on the organizational structure of the Ministry of Education. It was established to ensure that there is a very close follow-up at policy level of school feeding. But district level have school feeding committees with different key players, vice mayors, people in education, health, social affairs, agriculture, cooperatives, private sector key players. They are all part and parcel of that. And it goes to the low levels up to the level of a school. And at the level of school, there is very serious, strong engagement by the teachers, students, they are part of it, plus parents. So that is the institutional arrangement that will help us to streamline and make it efficient as we scale up across the whole country. Next, please. And this is the status. Initially, we've been feeding 680 within secondary schools. These were the ones who are getting the subsidy from government, but effective this fiscal year, we are now making it almost 4 times, close to 4 times students getting a subsidy for school feeding. And the budget was, if you compare the budget we used to have, which was around 8 billion Rwanda francs, close to 8 million, that one was multiplied, I think, 6-fold. So an increment of 583% was given to ensure that primary schools and pre-primary are also brought on board. So initially, the resources were relatively small, but now resources have been increased substantially, as you can see, with that proportion. And of course, the subsidy of government will be around 40% of the cost of the meal, and the remaining balance shall be provided by the parents' contributions in cash or kind, because even that arrangement was accepted in our school feeding arrangement. Next, please. So some of the recent developments, of course, I mentioned briefly. We're now going to be feeding 3.3 million pupils from 680. And of course, we're going to scale up parent contribution. And of course, the subsidy, we talked about it. And this is in financial terms, this is what has been done from $8 million to $54.7 million. And the institutional arrangement, I think I mentioned about it next. So in addition to providing food, government embarked on a massive construction of kitchens, especially in primary schools that were not having school feeding program. Initially, this was meant for secondary and some of the schools which had a section of primary and secondary. However, we had these numbers of primary schools that were not having school feeding, and we have established, constructed, well-equipped kitchens to enable the school feeding to commence in these schools. And in addition to that, we provided as government energy-saving cooking stoves to all these 2,648 schools to enable them, have the school feeding arrangement. Next. So in addition to that, of course, we are highly appreciative of our partners who have played a key role. And of course, at the forefront has been the World Food Program, who worked with the ministry to develop the school feeding operational guidelines. We worked with them to come up with a menu modeling of nutritious, locally sourced meals for school feeding. And these are regional based. So depending on specific regional food baskets, so was the menus modeled. And 3, we designed with them the low-cost permanent hand washing stations and kitchen. So especially in an event of COVID, government has rolled out, locally hand washing stations, and it is being scaled out across all schools within the education system of Rwanda. And in addition to that, we have made an integration of school feeding indicators in the school data management information system. So initially, the component of school feeding was out of the information management system for the education sector. That has been done to ensure that, equitable distribution, because the unit cost we provide is given per child and times the number of days that are expected within an academic year. So it can easily be followed from the information management system. And finally, in respect to that, capacity design for capacity strengthening, training materials for school feeding implementation was also done. So we've had support from our development partners to strengthen that component, which is going to streamline the school feeding program across the country. Next. Next, please. And I would like to bring to your attention, ladies and gentlemen, the initiatives that have been done. The government of Rwanda got $10 million from the Global Partnership for Education, and of the $10 million were meant to provide a response to COVID, especially during that a lot was impacted, especially some parents lost some jobs, especially the low-income earners who were affected, and we designated $5 million to target the subsidy. I mentioned about the subsidy of government, but there are some people who were affected negatively, especially the very poor. Then instead of requesting to complement the school feeding for their kids, at least for the first 3 months after the opening of the schools, we are going to top up. So in 11 districts out of 30 districts within the government of Rwanda. So that is going to target around 807,000 pupils or students who are coming from the poorest families. So at least during the course of this, as we are getting out of COVID, they won't be bothered to contribute. This is around close to 25% of the kids within the education system of Rwanda. So they will have a subsidy to accompany them in 3 months. Thereafter, they would have stabilized and also provide their own contribution. Next. So, and of course, $1 million was also designated to hand washing exclusively. However, this is not the only number of schools. We have scaled up hand washing equipment, but this amount was designated for the most remote schools, and other schools which are not so remote were instructed at least to have hand washing station with 12 taps to ensure that kids are clean and don't infect each other the COVID. Next, as I'm almost concluding, of course, during the lockdown, there are some boarding schools that had made big stocks. This was redistributed again to the very poor families, at least to accompany them during COVID-19 pandemic. And we developed guidelines ahead of school reopening. So we prepared ourselves so well. And in light of this, every child shall be having masks during classes. And we, as government, we have constructed 22,500 additional classes for use to ensure that even where possible social distancing is accommodated. This is something which has taken around $217 million to ensure that even the social distancing is possible amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. Next. So next. So finally, the final component I'm mentioning is the simplified mode of procurement of school feeding staff. So initially, through the conventional approach, it was a little bit complex, and sometimes pupils and students were not getting nutritious food. So in light of the modification that we did, the method of procurement of various foods was adopted, which was strengthening or bringing the opportunity for local markets, strengthen the local markets, especially for smallholders. So within this strategy, we are advising schools to get food stuff within the locality. Next slide, please. So which is readily available and locally sourced. So with that, we shall have involvement of the parents in the purchase of food for their children, which brings very strong ownership of school feeding by the parents. So the parents are going to be part of the committee, get the locally produced foodstuffs. And with that, we strengthen even the locality or leave the resources within their localities, because specific regions have food endowment, which is different from each other. So this is a component that has been adopted, and of course, that shall be utilized moving forth within the government of Rwanda. Next. Thank you very much for your kind attention. God bless.